Welcome to the Higher Ed Geek Podcast, where we explore the impact of EdTech on the student experience with engaging, fun, and relevant conversations that honor the wide range of work happening all across the higher ed ecosystem. I'm your host, Dustin Ramsdell. I've been working in and around higher ed for the past decade, focused on student support and digital experience. Join me every week for discussions with some of the best minds in education technology who'll be bringing you their perspectives on how digital transformation is reshaping the way we recruit, engage, and graduate learners. You'll hear firsthand accounts of how institutional leaders are developing their strategy, as well as get deeper on the stories of how these EdTech tools are being built to foster better student outcomes. With that, let's get to today's episode. Welcome back, everyone, for another awesome episode recorded live here at Illumia Momentum in Nashville. If you're following along, this is our third in a long string of great conversations we're having here right on the show floor, getting a great ambiance and just people watching stuff while we're talking. But we're here with another member of the Illumia team. Laura, if you want to briefly introduce yourself and your role, and then we'll get into a little bit more around kind of this, inauguration of the rebrand and some other stuff that you and your team are working on currently.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And thanks for hosting me for my first podcast.
Yeah,
this is
pleasure.
Super exciting. Yeah, Laura McLaughlin. I have been with Illumia. Goodness, it has been 33 years. It's kind of crazy to think about that. It's been a really interesting journey over those 33 years and have had lots of different responsibilities. That's really helped me grow to where I'm at today. So today, Chief Commercial Officer, what that really means is I have responsibility for the various business lines that we support, both in healthcare and higher education, as well as our support services, supply chain teams that really work and support all of our clients in the ecosystem. So, again, excited to be here today.
Yeah. It was also like a unique title, and it's not like a Chief Commercial Officer. It's because I think you see like Chief Revenue Officer, different things like that.
That's right.
Yeah, it's a cool one. But when I was waiting, I was wondering if you were going to like say the joke of like, oh, I've been at Illumia for like not even a day yet. If it's really new. I'll make the joke, but yeah, I mean, so like the part of this event is it's kind of this kickoff of the new brand that's been teased for a little bit, this annual conference. So, with this being kind of a new chapter and everything, and from your vantage point, like, what does it mean to you, and like, what can folks look forward to with this like new identity and things that maybe are like under the hood? Because we asked one of your colleagues to sort of on a, for their reflections and everything, but I feel like you may have a, unique perspective.
It's a super exciting time. Everyone says exciting, and maybe I'll say supercharged. We are at the pinnacle of bringing together a new brand, bringing together our platforms that have been around and servicing for decades, bringing together our partner ecosystem, bringing together, the teams across the organization under a new CEO who's got, fabulous background, phenomenal background. And so looking to like leverage his strengths, looking to leverage really the strength of the platform. How do we bring that together and do more? And so we're just at that pinnacle of like, how do we supercharge forward? And that's where we're at today.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what it means to me.
Yeah. And I think it is like, and I guess another sort of like buzzy word for something like this is this sort of like synergy, like that idea of like there's some overlap, between, what was Transact and then Seaboard, but now it's sort of like, I guess, finding the opportunities where there is that overlap, but then finding like things that are sort of complementary and all that has just been kind of, just exciting for me to see a little bit more closely firsthand, I guess, something like this happening where, is usually just kind of observing from the outside. But
I mean, that's a really good point. And I think I wouldn't think of it as a synergy. I really think about this as a unification. It's a unification of our talent. It's a unification of the skill sets and the passion. This here at Illumia, the team is so passionate about what they do and who they service. And it's harnessing that in a different way. So I really think of it as a unification.
Yeah, and I think, something that, cuts across the board and we're choosing to kind of focus on that's under your kind of broader umbrella for this conversation is around payments and kind of dynamics that are happening there. But if you want to, from your perspective, talk about kind of the path here, the story so far around payments alternatives for students in colleges and universities.
Yeah, a couple of things. Payments, it's interesting because, payments touches everyone. like you could be 5 years old, right? And you're making payments some way, same shape or form. And so it really is pervasive across the board to any age group. And it's really central to how we operate. And so what does that mean? How do we make it easy? Like it should be a non-event for you to make a payment of any kind. Whether it's a stored value, whether it's a check. I can't believe I'm saying check, but yes, that is still out there in the world today. Whether it's a open loop transaction, closed loop, what does that mean? And so, one of the things that we've been talking about is how do we facilitate all the different types of transactions that will take place, both in higher education and healthcare. So, we've been traditionally really focused in higher education, and how do we make 529 payments easy? How do we make PayPal easy? How do we bring that? So the first thing is rounding that out within higher education. How do we then bring that into healthcare? The strength of what we do in bringing different modalities. Our next step is really looking at the unification of how do we bring the strength and power of our payments from higher education over to healthcare. And how do we do that in a way that is meaningful and brings value, across the portfolio? And so I would say that, we are really thinking about what is our platform? How are we bringing together our capabilities and not just thinking about point solutions, but how do we bring our capabilities together, payment capabilities that can service across the portfolio, our commerce capabilities that can service across the portfolio. So not just thinking about it from a business unit or from a vertical perspective, but sourcing that power together and bringing it to bear. So that's really how we're thinking about things.
Yeah, because there's that idea of like within our lifetimes, it was that idea of like checks were kind of a predominant way that maybe you would pay for like a large, expenditure and things like that. Credit cards are just sort of like, in the ether, I guess, not as sort of, I guess like ubiquitous. And even those have just changed in terms of like RFID or, chips and all that kind of stuff. But, like within a relatively short amount of time, they're being just like completely distinct, different, like the PayPals like you mentioned, or Apple Pay, Google Pay, those sort of things. And then, some of the, dynamics that are changing things as well are like, payment plans, I think, being more in demand, and like sponsor payments of like a, employer benefit or something like that. So yeah, that idea that like, and yeah, 529 was another good call out. So like that idea that these sources, of money could be coming from any different places, and even then be then sort of like distributed in, a variety of ways and stuff. So like, just speaking about that, I guess, even if you want to just focus on sort of that like cadence piece, or, the idea of like, sponsor payments could be where it's like, oh, we'll only pay in this sort of framework or timing, or, when we get a certain piece of information, or, the idea of payment plans and stuff like that. I'm just curious, I guess, those sort of dynamics and how they're kind of changing things right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting, again, the ecosystem, I think about buy now, pay later. Like, we've been doing payment plans for decades. I started 33 years ago supporting higher education and how payment plans could help receivables. That's really where this came about. And now you see how that's expanded over time now into retail. And so I think what it's really critical for us is, particularly as we think about higher education, they are thinking about, how am I going to collect against this tuition bill? How am I going to collect, against this if you're, a storefront of some kind? And we want to make that seamless for them. We don't want for them to worry about that. And so, it's been evolving over time. Cash was king. But what comes with that is a whole infrastructure that's pretty significant. And when you take cash, and so we're seeing the trend of that going away. We still have billions of dollars of checks because schools just want to take their AR, any way that they can. But we're starting to see that dwindle. You're seeing more participation in payment plans because the nuance of how they can split up their tuition bill really can make it a lot easier for them. You're seeing a lot of changes right now within the government programs and, the Pell Grants and all of that. So there's just a lot of unknowns. So how do we make that easier? And so Venmo, we think PayPal is for my age, right? That is, that's who uses PayPal. But the students are using Venmo. And so how do you think about the ecosystem? on a campus and how to make that easier. They're using that all day long. And so how do you accept that today? There's also, there's movements that are going on in payments that they're looking at how to make a device-less transaction, right? How if you're on a campus and you're looking to go buy a pack of gum, how do you do that in an environment where you don't actually need a point-of-sale device? Like, things are moving and trending, really fast. I think that's going to be here to stay. I think crypto was one of those a few years ago that everyone got super excited about. Bitcoin, and how do you, accept that? I think given where that stands today, still not regulated, still a lot of unknowns. I think that's less of a buzzword now. And so, but I think this whole deviceless transaction is going to be the wave of the future. So we'll see, but that's where I'm kind of betting.
Yeah. I mean, I think there, folks like Amazon, I think have been toying with that idea of sort of like those sort of things, and I think. You see like in a lot of airports and stuff, sort of just like kind of fully autonomous stores where you are at least like, maybe you're doing the checking out, but it's like, I feel like that's another step in that direction of sort of like, complete self-service. And that could obviously allow for, it's okay, this campus store is open 24/7 because we don't need to like staff it. So if you need, a pack of gum at, soda or whatever, you can get it any time. Right. But, and I appreciate, even like that call out of crypto, like that was sort of like, kind of a murky, blurry, kind of unclear things. I think there is sort of a camp that does think that like, well, it should be, as easy to use Bitcoin as it is like your debit card or whatever. But it's like, you've not really ever seen that fully manifested. And maybe that's just not the lane that, ultimately will kind of come to pass. But, I think, that's like an interesting thing where there was a lot of like talk about it, but it didn't kind of shake out in the way that a lot of folks, I'm sure, thought about
that's
it.
Right.
But,
still to come. We'll see.
But and I think that is like, that idea of something I thought of, and I don't know if this kind of plays in any sort of feedback that you've gotten, is that like, I think we, have reached peak student debt, the idea of like sort of the tolerance of, people taking out these loans and carrying them and whatever else, like the idea of payment plans being more often, and even just culturally buy now, pay later, whatever, like people are more comfortable with that, where it's like, that fits into my monthly budget better, and I'd rather do that than have to take out $20,000 worth of loans that just sit there for 4 years, and then I have to try to, figure out how to pay them back. Like, there's not as much kind of transparency there sometimes about like, what am I, going to be anticipating, on the back end. So I would just imagine that idea of like, I'd rather do a payment plan or do anything else other than just like, sign on the dotted line to get like tens of thousands of dollars of student debt is sort of at play, where people are just open to alternatives, as it makes sense for them.
And I think higher education is evolving, and I think the students are evolving and how they're thinking about their education. I think there's a transformation of, I'm going to invest in these 4 years. What is the outcome of that? What is my return on investment? And am I approaching this investment in the right way? And I just think how I thought about paying for education and how I've seen my kids and students think about it today, it's really evolving. And so it's not hey, I take out a full loan or I pay in cash anymore. It is starting to get smarter about, do I want to be paying about this education in 10 years? And so how do I think about the economics of that and using all of these different, whether it's scholarships, right? Whether it's employee funding, that's, becoming really relevant as well. Tuition payment plans. Do I, take out a small loan? They're really starting to think about it, from a financial, perspective and return on investment, which is, we're seeing that evolve.
Yeah, and that's sort of like my mind kind of, the next to last question here is that idea of like, affordability, accessibility, like this is a big component. Either people are sort of like apprehensive just with kind of the sticker shock of it, or, in the past, the limitations on the abilities for people to kind of do what you're saying now that's kind of more manifest of like allocate or sort of like, get funds from a variety of sources and allocate them to their like tuition and stuff. And so I'm just curious to get like, are you hearing or seeing like, I guess, institutional leaders as they're maybe sort of like feeling the heat around like enrollment challenges or whatever? They're like, well, we need to do whatever we can to be as accessible, from like a affordability standpoint as we can. So like the idea that we maybe historically have not done payment plans or haven't really looked at it in a long time. We need to kind of revisit it now because like, there's a lot of enrollment challenges.
Yeah, I think there's, traditionally, and this is, not across the board, but traditionally your enrollment and admissions team, they have very specific goals, and whether it's enrollment numbers, whether it's, certain, student, type that they're looking to bring in. And then you've got your business office that traditionally is really cared about, how am I collecting these dollars, right? And then financial aid has sat in the middle of all of that. And many years ago, you started to see this evolution of student financial services that was bringing them together. And I've seen that, sort of start to fade away. But kind of given where we sit today, where students are rethinking about what their return on investment is, you have some students saying, this is not where I want to. I'm good with, getting a different type of a 2-year degree or a trades degree, that there's kind of this forcing function that is unifying, kind of similar unifying that where we're going, but it's unifying the admissions office, the financial aid office, and the business office. And that accountability isn't necessarily just singular in their own areas, but it's about the student experience and engagement and also the outcome for both the student and for, the school. And so I'm starting to see that dialogue take place and thinking about how can we talk about affordability up front earlier that, encourages still enrollment, but it's bringing together kind of that financial aid component and the business office component. So that's actually really exciting for me to see.
Yeah, because I think it is unfortunate sometimes, just culturally, any organization, they just don't offer a lot of transparency to their own staff as to just how this all works or whatever, you do your part and kind of send it away or whatever. So that idea of people who are working in admissions or, in a financial aid or services office or whatever it might be, kind of have a full appreciation for okay, your ability to leverage these different funding sources or payment plans, whatever else, this is the impact on the business of this, institution and, why it kind of matters for us to do it this way and, all that. But I think it is just such a kind of interesting time on that front of that sort of kind of cohesion and collaboration. It's just part of it, the tools you're using is a part of it. And then I think just, being responsive kind of culturally to certainly the demands from, students and families and stuff. And I'll even just give a shout out because I can stare at them right from here. I knew of GradGuard for a while and I talked to some of them last night. The idea of you can, buy insurance for your flight or whatever you're checking out. That idea of sort of a similar ethos in this sort of situation, because it's okay, all this is well and good. What if some crazy life event happens and making sure that the student and the institution can be made whole? It's reassurances like that and options and just accessibility and all those. It's that's sort of the perfect storm in a good way of things kind of coming together to allow an institution to be as accessible as they can be for students.
And that's where, we see that we have responsibility to sit in the middle of that it is our role to make that easy for institutions. So when you think about, GradGuard, which I've known John Fees for decades, worked with him a long time ago, but, what the value that they're bringing in and how do we integrate with them? You mentioned sponsor payments earlier on, and, that sits in the middle of, so many different, either it's a government entity or other employers, and how do we fit into that ecosystem? I mentioned, Venmo. And so I see, accountability for us, that we have the responsibility to service the students and service higher education and make it easy to sit in the middle of all what, that ecosystem has to offer. And so I hope we're doing a job. I think we're doing a good job, and it's continuing to get exciting as, more opportunities are out there to bring that into our umbrella. And so that's what we've been focused on.
Yeah, that's great stuff. And just appreciate your kind of expertise in this area, because it's just dynamics of things that I didn't even think of that idea of a lot of people, use Venmo to send money back and forth. So the idea of I'd want to be able to use that anywhere on the campus if I could, just to get, so the smaller purchases, but then, just all the different sources that people would use for the larger tuition payments and stuff. So all of this being said, give you the final word. Kind of we're wrapping up every conversation we're doing here with this final question. Advice that you would give to higher ed leaders navigating this moment?
I would say, there's a lot to navigate in higher education today. Administration changes, that is impactful. What's going on with the Department of Education, right? Those bring different challenges and rules and regulations. You've got students that are thinking about their future and, what their contribution is going to be. You've got AI that's in the mix of all of this that we're all wondering, how is this going to help me? How is that going to change how I think about my career path? And so I would just encourage, higher education sits in the middle of all of this confusion. At the end of the day, it's about the students. It's about, what is this next generation? How are we supporting this next generation with all of these different nuances, with social media living in our day-to-day, AI and the unknown? Higher education sits right in the middle of that. And how are they helping their students, go on that journey? So I would say focus on them. At the end of the day, that's what it's all about.
Yeah, I always love just sort of, because again, people kind of come to this question independently in their own ways. So that has been a common bit of advice of just sort of there's a lot of noise, a lot of, disruption and turbulence, whatever, but let that always be your North Star,
Exactly.
Just kind of ground your conversations.
Wherever they are in their journey, meet them there.
Yeah, because I think it is an idea of my kind of mantra often is good technology gets out of your way. So the idea of a lot of things we mentioned, certainly over the past several years or past decades, you may have hit walls and you're just completely stopped out of oh, I guess I can't do this here, in this instance or whatever. But now that idea that there's seamless fluidity, just kind of that ability of hey, however you want to pay for this, we'll give you options or, whatever else. So, and then even just with all the kind of stuff that's here, it's an idea of we'll still give you an ID card, a physical one if you want it, but you can use your phone. And there's even people here doing facial recognition or whatever, I keep mentioning that, I feel in each episode, because I just thought that was really cool. But the idea of just sort of that idea of seamless stuff, technology that gets out of your way. And all of that serves that goal of okay, then the students can just focus on their studies and building their social capital and just learning and growing and all that good stuff. So
exactly.
So we will leave it there. I appreciate you so much, Laura, for sharing all you did, taking time to chat with me for this, and ways to connect with you and Illumia, of course, in the episode description. But just really great chatting with you.
Yeah, you too. Thanks for getting me through the first podcast. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the Higher Ed Geek Podcast. This show is a proud member of the Enrollify Network, home to Higher Ed's largest collection of podcasts. Enrollify is where higher ed goes to grow. So be sure to check out our other podcasts, webinars, video clips, blogs, and more. Visit Enrollify.org and subscribe for all the latest details and content drops directly to your inbox. Enrollify is brought to you by Element 451, the digital workforce platform for higher ed. Learn more at element451.com.